Welcome to Like One. This is a poetry reading. We raise money for the One Fund. We have poets from all over the United States. We are blessed to have many from Boston, but we also have people from all different areas of the country, from all different backgrounds. We felt like it was important to have many poets come together for this important project. Tonight we are featuring Jill McDonough, Kevin Carey, and Emily Pinal, who will share with you their poems from Like One as well as from other poetry books of their own. Our first poet, Jill McDonough, some people call her the Richard Pryor of poetry, not only because of certain language she uses in her poetry, but also because she's broken many barriers. She has won, not two, but three pushcart prizes. She directs the creative writing program at UMass Boston and has several books, and tonight she'll be our first poet.
I'm going to start by reading two poems by people who weren't able to be with us tonight. Fred Marchant, who is Professor Emeritus at Suffolk University, and Robert Pinsky, former poet laureate, and he was my professor too. And they're in this pretty book. Look at it. All right, Fred's. Hi, Fred. That's not Fred. If he were here, he would be reading his own poem. A screen porch. Summer nights, I loved the cool pillow as it settled into dampness, the city noise as it dwindled, the smell of plants, lights in the apartment across the street going out, crickets. First light had to be inferred from shadows slipping off locusts and tall wild sumacs, from wet sparkles in the mesh. A daddy long legs looking right at you. Immortal Longings by Robert Pinsky. Inside the silver body, slowing as it banks through veils of cloud, we float separately in our seats. Like the cells or atoms of one creature, needs and states of a shuddering God. Under him, a thirsty brilliance, pulsing or steady. The fixed lights of the city and the flood of car lights coursing through the grid. Delivery, arrival, departure, whim. Entering and entered. Touching and touched, down the lit boulevards, over the bridges and the river like an arm of night. Book. Cigarette, bathroom, thirst. Some of us are asleep. We tilt, roaring, over the glittering zodiac of intentions. I love reading those poems. Those guys are great poets. They're better readers than I am, but I felt like I was reading like Robert, actually. There's something about the steady. He has it, and he says human, too. He's pretty great. So I'm going to read two poems by me, and then that's it for my part. And one of them, Accident Mass, they're both about Boston. One of them's in this book. It's Accident Mass Ave. And I'm going to read it on TV. Accident Mass Ave. I stopped at a red light on Mass Ave in Boston, a couple blocks away from the bridge. And a woman in a beat-up old Buick backed into me. Like cranked her wheel, rammed right into my side. I drove a Chevy pickup truck. It being Boston, I got out of the car yelling, swearing at this woman, a little woman, whose first language was not English. But she lived and drove in Boston too, so she knew, we both knew, that the thing to do is get out of the car, slam the door as hard as you fucking can, and yell things like, "What the fuck were you thinking? You fucking blind? What the fuck is going on? Jesus Christ." So we swore at each other with perfect posture, unnaturally angled chins. I threw my arms around, sudden jerking motions with my whole arms, the backs of my hands toward where she had hit my truck. But she hadn't hit my truck. She hit the tire. No damage done. Her car was fine too. We saw this while we were yelling, and then we were stuck. The next line in our little drama should have been, "Look at this fucking dent. I'm not paying for this shit. I'm calling the cops, lady." Maybe we'd throw in a, "You're in big trouble, sister," or, "I just hope for your sake there's nothing wrong with my fucking suspension." That sort of thing. But there was no fucking dent. There was nothing else for us to do. So I stopped yelling, and she looked at the tire she'd backed into, her little eyebrows pursed and worried. She was clearly in the wrong. I was enormous, and I'd been acting as if I'd like to hit her. So I said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with my car, nothing wrong with your car. Are you okay?" She nodded and started to cry. So I put my arms around her and I held her, middle of the street, Mass Ave, Boston, a couple blocks from the bridge. I hugged her and I said, "We were scared, weren't we?" And she nodded and we laughed. I'm going to read one more poem, another Boston poem. This one, I think it's relevant to know that I'm a lesbian who lives in Jamaica Plain. And sometimes that becomes the topic of conversation in a cab going home from a bar at 3 a.m. 3 a.m. Our cab driver tells us how Somalia is better than here because in Islam we execute murderers. So fewer murders. But isn't there civil war there now? Aren't there a lot of murders? Yes, but in general it's better. Not now, but most of the time. He tells us about how smart the system is, how it's hard to bear false witness. We nod. We're learning a lot. I say, once we are close to the house, I say, "What about us?" 2 women married to each other. "Don't be offended," he says gravely. "But a man with a man, a woman with a woman, it would be a public execution." We nod. A little silence along the southeast corridor. Then I say, "Yeah, I love my country." This makes him laugh. We all laugh. "We aren't offended," says Josie. "We love you." Sometimes I feel like we're proselytizing, spreading the word of gay. The cab is shaking with laughter. The poor man relieved. We're not mad. He sort of wants us dead. The 2 of us soothing him, wanting him comfortable, wanting him to laugh. "We love our country," we tell him, and Josie tips him. She tips him well. Thank you.
That was the amazing Jill McDonough. And how could she possibly say that she is not a good reader like Robert and Fred? She was amazing. We are so lucky to have her, and we are so lucky to have our next guest, Kevin Carey. He is a Renaissance man. He is not limited to poetry. He does fiction, he makes films, documentary films, and coaches basketball. I mean, he's not doing all that. He teaches at Salem State. Our next poet, Kevin Carey.
Thanks, Debbie. The first poem I'm going to read is from the anthology. It's called Revere Beach After Hours. It's after midnight, still 90 degrees. The customers are 20 deep at each window, most of them drunk, all of them on the make, all of them hungry. We push food at them like one might throw meat at a wild bear. The line feeding on itself and growing like the blob in the Steve McQueen movie. Or some Trojan war flick where the soldiers keep coming in waves, know how many arrows they take. The crowd swells after the bars break and the people are more drunk with each order, and a girl and a guy make out in front of the line and someone yells, "Get a room!" and a white Cadillac pulls up to the curb and turns her radio loud. They all start dancing, long hair, tight pants, hips moving to the disco beat, boogie, oogie, oogie. And a plane flies low overhead on its way to East Boston, and the sway gets louder with the laughter, and the sidewalk moves with the motion and the madness. And for a moment I stop what I'm doing and stand with my hands on my hips, the food hot and waiting behind me. I stare at the bobbing heads, the hungry mouths, the wave of temporary joy against the dark ocean across the street. The next poem I'm going to read is from a collection of poetry called The 115 to Penn Station. And this is the title poem. The 115 to Penn Station. 10 minutes out of Back Bay Station, and I'm reminded of a long ago train and the futile mission I was on then, and where it brought me and why it cornered me into thinking I was onto something. Something more than the wrong hard turn that left me high but hungry and hurt. And when I woke up, I realized some things can't ever be fixed, no matter how hard you try. The tracks connect us like telephone lines and power grids and graffiti walls and parking lots and barbed wire and chain link and churches, miles and miles of churches, and acres of trees flipping by my window like the clips of conversation around me. You can see it all out a train window. You can see the signs, checks cashed, cold beer, rooms by week, shows nightly, hawk here, bet here, pay for junk here. The spray paint, broken glass, plywood walls, make peace, Jesus saves, funk lives. The clothesline, the cardboard, the vapid faces of the children, long lines of blank-faced children. And it reminds you how easy it is to walk a mile like a rummy in both directions. Run farther and farther away and closer to yourself until the worst bet becomes the only one left, and the trouble follows you like soup cans tied to a wedding car. But sometimes you catch a glimpse of 100 sparrows bursting from the cover of a lonely maple tree, or some kid hitting a rubber fastball high over the telephone wire in slow motion. Or you pass a man standing in a junkyard pointing to the bottom of a scrap pile, and you think no matter where you go, you're always trying to get to the bottom of the junk you choose, the junk you hide from, the junk that keeps you riding the rails. And the train sneaks into the city as if someone left the back door open. When I'm not teaching, I'm coaching 7th grade basketball. I've been doing it at the same school for 16 years. So this is a poem about that. Basketball. I don't play so much anymore, but I coach 7th graders how to make a layup, break a half-court trap, play a 2-3 zone. It's different from the days in high school when I lived for it. Shoveled snow from my backyard court to shoot around all winter, summer camps, state tournaments in Boston Garden. Now it's more about helping kids to feel good about playing, or sometimes keeping them from killing each other. Like last week when a red-headed kid punched someone and I asked why, and he said, "Do you want to know what he called me?" And I said, "Yes, what did he call you?" And he said, "Fire nuts." And I realized then that coaching has little to do with basketball and more to do with not laughing at the wrong moment. Yet I still remember what it was like to get a new ball every Christmas morning. Still remember my father's voice in the stands. Still remember 2 free throws in a state tournament game. Still remember weekends playing at the YMCA where Pete Pedro called us yardbirds for showering with our bathing suits on. And the schoolyard where I played for hours and hours, where I felt safe, where I fit in, where the names they came up with didn't matter. And I'll end with a new poem. Called Not Much to It. You draw with chalk on your sidewalk. You ride your bike. You go for ice cream with your friends. You party in college. You get to figuring by the fire on a cold night in the mountains. You listen to jazz on the ocean. You catch a ball game now and then. You cradle with different folks till you find one that fits. Then you wake up one day sitting on a creaky porch, missing your kids, patting your dog, drinking a can of cold beer. The summer night like a blanket on your shoulders, and something you knew floats by in the night sky, just out of reach. Thank you.
So before we have our final poet, I was going to tell you a little bit more about our book. We made a decision. We made it last May, right after the marathon bombing, and people were still in hospitals at that time. There was still a lot of information that we weren't sure what had happened exactly, what was going to happen to different people, and of course there were a lot of amputations and things like that. And we chose to make a book that really was about healing and humor for the community. So the poems you've heard have been pretty joyful or happy or funny poems, and that was our thinking. We thought that people needed a break and that we wanted to help use poetry as a healing tool. So I wanted to share, we didn't just include poems from the area and from around the country. We included a few poems that are more classic poems, like Walt Whitman. This is his poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown in the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became, tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself into the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. And one reason we chose to include that poem was initially a lot of us are professors that are involved with the book, and it's such a great poem for students because so much of what we learn in the classroom, it's different out there. It's so different to go out and see it in the real world. But also, after the marathon, so many of us were just glued to CNN. A lot of us remember the day in Watertown where we were watching television all day, trying to figure out what was going to happen, were they going to catch the bombers. And it's important sometimes to just take a break from things and look at the stars and really appreciate life and connect. So that's why we chose that poem. This is a poem that I wrote. This is a poem called Disco. When I was born, everyone was disco dancing. Bright colored lights mapping pathways to eyes, pointing fingers to the moon, arching bodies like warriors, spinning like they could change the rotation of the planet. They say this era never ended, or never existed. A purge of clothing, dumped in a truck. College kids sneak it out for 70s parties, wondering why the collars are so wide, necklines so deep, medallions so heavy. I stare at these 70s photos, the odd woman in polyester bell-bottoms, oversized glasses, the strange man in the leisure suit with a mullet and a giant mustache, wondering why my baby album has no pictures of my parents. On that note, I'm going to bring up our next poet. Our next poet is Emily Pinal, who is only a junior at Endicott College and has already published her own poetry book, been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, and it's just this amazing talent here. So here she is, Emily Pinal.
I'm going to start by reading one of the poems in the anthology that's by Julie Kane. It's called In Summer, My Father. In summer, my father came to life, like the seeds of purple clover under the lawn, like the seeds of Queen Anne's lace under roadside meadows. In summer, my father stood knee-deep in the sea that could not drown him, being born in a sailor's call, in the bracing Atlantic, and cupped his hands and drank. In summer, my father's copper freckles merged into a tan, though my own would never do it, merged, and the golden fuzz stood up on the backs of his fingers. In summer, my father grew tomatoes, setting aside his papers to scratch in the backyard soil, setting aside his cocktail and Viceroy cigarettes. In summer, my father followed baseball, hearing the Boston Red Sox on a crackling transistor radio, hearing the echoes of cheers for his hits at Melrose High School. In summer, my father joined his buddies, Sunday morning plucking a golf shirt from the rainbow in his closet, Sunday evenings slinking home beery, his pockets full of stubby pencils. In summer, my father banished winter, banished the tunneling into snowbanks to sleep in France and Belgium, banished lighting a fire in his helmet in the sleet in Nazi Germany. In summer, my mother took to her room with a book, complaining that she felt faint, that it might be a touch of heat stroke, complaining of poison ivy, of an ear infected from swimming. But in the summer, my father came to life. And the next poem I'm going to read is my poem that's in the anthology. And it is called Spirit of the Rain. There is something very calming about rain, even when it gets really thick and out of control. The line between the road and the pond is blurred, but Brian pulls to a gentle stop as the windshield wipers do the best they can do. A bird with a long neck is standing at the edge of the water. It reminds me of a swan, but its body isn't full enough. Darkness, blurred vision. The bird seems to be gray or white. I think that's a crane, Brian says, or maybe a heron. We stare into the path of the headlights as though we've never seen a bird before. Native Americans believe that a gray heron brings good luck, especially if you see one take flight. The moment the windshield wipers clear the view, Brian snaps a picture. The soaked bird spreads its wings and takes off into the rain. And next I'm going to read from my book of poems called No Need to Speak. I'm going to read the first poem that's in the book called Sharing What Is Stolen. When you think about it, or don't think about it, or refuse to think at all of the lines are stolen, because all words have been used before us. We all share these words, and all us writers do is simply organize them into phrases and sentences to make us feel these stolen feelings that have already been felt before from someone else's life in words and meaning that poured from their pen, their mouth, and their skin all over onto the next page, in the next life, in which we share, yet it is still stolen because it is recycled and used and isn't ours because it was theirs. So we speak these words that have been wrinkled and sweated in, and we write our names in them, staking our claim when we have none at all because they are stolen, and we didn't pay for the copyright or make monthly payments to the dead. So therefore, we are not legally entitled to speak or write anything at all in any order because we are all breathing stolen time. And the next poem I'm going to read is called Not Supposed to. You are not supposed to be friends with a professor. There are clear lines of authority and respect that cannot be crossed. No one would take the professor seriously if they were friends with them. It would be unprofessional, inappropriate, unconventional, and unpredictable. It is too close. And you are not supposed to be friends with the manager. It would be distracting and unprofessional. There would be a conflict of interest, work would not get done, laughing when people that matter are looking or watching. It is too close. You are not supposed to be friends with anyone who is significantly older than you. It can only mean that there is a sexual attraction going one way or both ways. It is inappropriate, unpredictable, immature, and very difficult to understand. It is too close. Huckleberry Finn wasn't supposed to be friends with Jim, but that forbidden friendship is fictional and stays embedded in Twain's pages. It is touched by dry fingers and spit, high school teachers with lesson plans, and kids who wait to finish their essays the night before. The truth is that the only thing that these inappropriate friendships are too close to is actually making a new art form. And society is absolutely terrified of becoming characters in a book. But this isn't literature. No one will study this and write about the people. All that will be found is this poem next to my bones. Thank you.
I'm going to close on the words of William Carlos Williams, his poem Primrose. It's such a great poem for this time of year because finally it's getting warm, and that's what William Carlos Williams is celebrating. Yellow, 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 yellow. It is not a color, it is summer. It is the wind on the willow, the lap of waves, the shadow under a bush, a bird, a bluebird, 3 herons, a dead hawk rotting on a pole. Clear yellow! It is the piece of blue paper in the grass, or the 3 cluster of green walnuts swaying, children playing croquet, or one boy fishing, a man swinging his pink fist as he walks. It is lady's thumb, forget-me-nots. In the ditch, moss under the corral, the wavy lines and split rock, a great oak tree. It is disinclination to be 5 red petals of a rose. It is a cluster of bird's breast flowers on a red stem 6 feet high. 4 open yellow petals above sepals turned backwards into reverse spikes. Tufts of purple grass spot the green meadow and cloud the sky. So thank you for joining us tonight for our poetry reading. I want to thank specifically Kevin Carey and Emily Pinal and Jill McDonough, as well as Brookline Interactive. We've really enjoyed being here, so thank you.